And the thing is, the speaking in tongues, for most people never think to look under the hood and say, what is that?
Right.
Most charismatic people would say that the gift of tongues is an angelic language, not a known earthly language, an angelic language that when spoken, either in your private prayer language when it is merely beneficial for you and your relationship with God, but when it is spoken to other people, they can hear it in their own language. That's one view, that it's an angelic language that is angelic. It's not a human language. I don't particularly take that view. I take the view that the gift of tongues was an ability to speak a known earthly language that you didn't know for the purposes of evangelism. And I agree with that on Harwood, that we still see this sort of thing today. It just doesn't happen a lot in like the Bible Belt, because this is not the front lines of the mission field with people who don't know the Bible, have never encountered the Bible.
And there's a both and view. There's not just either it's a known language.
There's two kinds. Yeah. But to me that seems like an unnecessary.
And I take a minority view on this. I'm a view that it was always ecstatic utterances. And there's only like me and J.D. Gunn and
I counted for that in the first view, because you would say that on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, they were doing ecstatic utterances, but everyone heard it in their own language, even though previously
even though Luke goes out of his way to point that they heard. Here's why I believe that. Number one.
Wait a minute. That's your view.
That's the correct
It is
view.
true that it says that they heard it in their own language, but in verse 4, I believe, of the same chapter, it says that God gave them the ability to speak in unknown tongues.
Yes. And it's always, and in the ancient Mediterranean world, it's always ecstatic utterance. And here's my case.
Now, you can't always just punt to, I know what the first century world was better than you, so I'm right. No,
here's my, but let me make my case.
This is an objectionable
Number
issue.
one, Jerusalem at that time, bi or trilingual, hearing multiple languages is not going to arouse an occasion for someone to accuse them of drunken behavior, period. Speaking in multiple languages is not a big deal in the ancient world. It's not even a big deal in the modern world. And two, Luke goes out of his way to say, number one, his tongues, and
he doesn't go out of his way.
And number two, he talks about dialects. And then the rest of the speech was most likely is in Greek anyway.
No, that was rhetoric. He doesn't go out of his way. I could say he goes out of his way to say they spoke in these other tongues. No. He says in one place they spoke with other tongues, and then in another place it says they heard it in their own tongues.
Right.
Both are consistent with they spoke in other tongues. Your view is only consistent with one of those verses.
No, it's consistent with the whole passage and consistent with the ancient context of Jerusalem in the first century. Yeah. Oh, it is an assertion, but I mean it's more plausible. Plus,
I disagree,
and it's also consistent with the fact that in all of the ancient literature, it's always ascetic.
Okay, so let's go then to because this is much more interesting than whatever we were talking about.
Oh, the debate.
So we're having our own debate. So if that's the case,
I said it's a minority view. Craig Keener doesn't agree with me. It doesn't matter that he doesn't agree with me.
This is all smokescreen stuff. It doesn't matter that it's a minority view. Yeah. I don't care. The minority view can be right. At one time, the minority view was that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and it is right. So, but here's the thing: if that's true. Like we've talked a little bit about Acts 2, all right? We've presented our views there. Okay, now let's take it to the somewhat anecdotal but also historical perspective. If that's the case, then why is it that phenomenon seems to have completely disappeared? And we do see little indications that maybe that's what's going on there, maybe that's there. But even most thoughtful charismatics will say, it seems like it pretty well went off the map historically until the early 1900s with something
except for Michael Brown, who told us in that debate, by the way, the whole, I mean, I'm not a shill for the charismatic movement. I don't care.
Well, but again, he's talking about tongues. He doesn't tell you the content.
I'm just looking at the ancient world as someone who reads this literature and so, like John MacArthur will complain, well, all those pagans, they believed in these ecstatic utterances, but the real deal was human language. The reason why all those pagans, because that's what they understood glossolalia to be. This is what it was. And that's why I have no reason to see it different in Acts 2. And like I always tell people, the Bible's weird. It's got weird stuff.
No, okay, if he wanted to say they had the ability to speak another known language, how would he have said that?
Well, he could have used the word for language instead of the word for tongue. Or
that's the term that is also used.
It is used
for languages.
Well, it's one of the terms used for. It's a term, but it's also just like I said. If if you're thinking about Jerusalem in the first century, they were accused of being drunk, which there was alcohol also involved in these pagan, ecstatic utterances type deals too. Most people were bi or trilingual anyway, and they didn't necessarily. It didn't just stick with tongues. It also has dialectos. It was also talking about their dialects, like
right.
Which I mean, you have a dialect from Nashville, but you still speak English,
right?
Right. We're Southern folks. We sound
right.
Southern.
More evidence that we're talking about known languages.
No, I was just saying that that's what they heard in their own dialects. But it's not evidence
that
it's not evidence that their tongues
spoke with these other tongues.
Well, they spoke in tongues,
right?
But what they heard and what they were speaking, not necessarily the same thing. And what when you look at the text, what would occasion the charge of drunkenness that Peter? The first thing Peter has to refute is the idea.
Well, that's a separate issue. You're talking now about the term glossolalia.
Yeah.
The whole drunken thing is a separate piece of evidence. So let's stay on target. So what you're saying, here's your theory, is that in verse 4 it says other tongues or tongues, and it is talking about what they're speaking because that's what it says. Yeah. But it's talking about a heavenly angelic tongue that we don't have.
I don't use that language.
Okay,
ecstatic,
spiritual, whatever.
Ecstatic, yeah.
Well, is it from God?
Yeah, but it's going to manifest itself.
Then let's use the Pauline term, heavenly.
It's like what kind of things were they when they're having these visions? Altered states of consciousness, things like that. That's the language.
Well, okay, but the point is, you think in verse 4, if I remember correctly, it's verse 4, that it's talking about tongues like a lot of charismatics think today, like not a human language, not an earthly known language. Okay, but then and that's where it says they spoke. That's what they spoke. But then down in verse 6, I think it's verse 6. When it gets down to verse 6 and it's talking about what they heard, that's in human languages. So that what is being spoken is one thing, but what's being heard is a different thing. Right? Okay. I'm very familiar with that view.
Yeah.
The other view that is consistent says that verse 4 is they're speaking in tongues, which I define as other known languages. And then in verse 6, it says they heard in their tongue. In other words, in their own language.
The tongue or is it dialect is verse 6? I can't remember. I don't have the text in front of me.
I don't think that that's relevant.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of relevant.
Well, what's relevant is in verse 6, it's talking about something that's known among humans.
It's talking about all these people from all these different areas, which I mean, Greek would have been a universal common language for them anyway. So I mean, they could have easily
not necessarily, but that is a common response to this. And I know Steve Gregg also puts that view out there too, but it's not necessarily true. I mean, today you could say
actually, most people in the empire spoke.
You could say today in certain places, like say where I've been to the Philippines, these are English-speaking people that are required to speak English in the schools. These people, they speak Tagalog, they speak these other however many Filipino languages, but they all know it's English is the common. They understand that. Well, maybe grab 10 of them at random, and you'll find one that doesn't. So I don't know about that,
Well, okay, but I know about it. So.
Well, you weren't there. You didn't live there.
Here we go with it. What you want to do when you want to exegete the text, this is the problem. This is why I agree with Daniel Sanchez about the problem with the grammatical historical is they weigh so much on the grammar they forget the historical, and then you got to broaden that to the sociocultural. We're low context readers. They were high context readers, so they would already know what their cultural situation was, and so. I try to approach the text from that. And when I look at it, I think Jimmy Dunn and another group of minority scholars are probably right. Given the not context first verses before it and few verses after, I'm talking about it's the situation of the first century Jerusalem, that audience, it just makes sense to me to see it like that.
Well, now you know kind of how that debate goes. I hope
which would be a much better debate if we did this full blown than the debate between Zachariah and Michael Brown.
This was off the cuff. Yeah. We just we didn't even have the text in front of us. But we have had this discussion before, and I will say that the one charismatic guy in our office area actually agree with me. But anyway, Tim. Tim. So, but anyway,
like I said, I have a minority view here.
But let's get off of that for a second, and let's say, I will say this: there are a couple of passages that in 1 Corinthians that are a little weird for my. But
they're weird for everybody.
They're ambiguous. They're very difficult to understand. I don't know what Paul was thinking. So those are the one. There's really just one that gives me a little trouble.
Yeah.
And since it's so weird, like I don't mind
I tell people,
not understanding.
The Bible's weird.
Yeah,
the Bible's weird.
But
weird stuff in it.
Anyway, I hope that was enjoyable. That was
about
debate time with Braxton and Johnathan.
Yeah, bought a Honda, should have bought a Yamaha. You know, I mean,
Antamabota.
Yeah. I don't speak in tongues, but if I did, it would sound something like that. That's why I don't freak out when I hear that stuff and hear that, because I think it's actually ecstatic utterances. You know, there's a lot of interesting topics from the ancient world like that, and what was going on with John of Patmos when he was like, you know, having his vision. What a relative, you know. Paul, when he was having his vision, clearly says vision in Acts.
Just when you said John of Patmos just then,
yeah,
was that because that's how the scholars talk, and you want to make sure to be careful that might or might not be the same John?
No, I think it's the same John.
Okay, good.
But I wanted to people.
Whenever you hear someone say the author of the book of Luke, you know what that is?
We don't believe
that's code language for I'm a liberal.
There you go. No, just John of Patmos, just evoking revelation.
Yeah.
So the language of that, they would use, like we mentioned earlier, altered states of consciousness, where they actually, if you looked at them, you can't see what's going on, the revelatory activity that's happening, but it's almost as if they're transported dimensionally. They're just standing there, and they would. All the descriptions of prophets from the ancient world, it's all kind of uniform, where they're all just kind of, it looks like they're spazzing out. If you ever saw the History Channel did a thing on the book of Revelation, right? Mm-hmm. And they kept showing to John, and he looked like a crazy man. That's one of the few things they actually get right in those kinds of things.
Well, hold on.
That people are described in the ancient world when they receive as like spazzing out.
But here's the thing to remember with all this. Like, is Christianity true and these other religions false?
Yeah.
Okay, so that there was an oracle, or that there were these other Greco-Roman or other pagan groups that when they were possessed of a demon and communicated, had that spazzed out look, doesn't necessarily mean that when a godly man is spoken to by God, that he's necessarily going to look that same way.
I don't know. Jacob walked funny after he got in a wrestling match with God.
Well, he got his leg messed up. I mean, there's an actual reason for that.
No, I'm just saying, it's a weird. I don't doubt it, because it's a weird experience.
Here's what I'm saying. And I've thought about this a lot before, like when we've talked about things like this on the show. Is when we, like, because I know we do have to do this to get the historical...
You wait until you're sitting there, you have a vision, and you go into a trance, and I walk into your office.
Well, that's precisely it. We don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, I'm betting that it'd be something weird, because you'll be freaked out.
Well, it'll be weird.
John says, I fell down like a dead man. I'm telling you, if you had an experience like that, you'd be weird to look at.
Okay, yeah, but how? That's the point. How would I be weird? Because here's the thing.
Well, say
no. Hold on.
Everywhere.
I got to get out. Okay. But this is important. I want to get this out. So, like, when we're on the show and we're talking about, or in our work, we're doing, we're trying to get the historical context right. Mm-hmm. And so we say, okay, what is glossolalia like? What are these ecstatic trances like? And the way we figure that out is we look to what do we know from the ancient world that was like at the time. Okay, but what we know from the ancient world outside of the Bible about what is probably something pagan. Obviously so. Does that mean that the actual authentic thing is going to look just like what the pagans experienced? Or was there something unique about this that, because it was real, like from God?
Yeah, there's what we call just kind of a shared social consciousness of the ancient world that you see a little bit of.
But if they were making it up, that would make sense.
There's no Bible text that describes what it's like for someone to be in a trance, other than they're having a trance. You know, there's certain language cues that gives people a reason to think Adam went into a kind of a trance-like state, similar to what Abraham went into because of the Hebrew language there when God severed his half to make Eve.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And there's certain cues like that, but nobody's actually writing a didactic description of what these kinds of things are like. And most people actually don't in prophetic literature, but in other like novellas and other like storytelling and other didactic teachings or whatever, they might describe an event where they witnessed something like this. And so you only get it in a little bit of flickers. But
you get my point.
I understand
if they were making it up, that would make sense to me. Like if they were making it up, well, how did everybody else see this happen in their day? Well, that's how Christians saw it too, because everybody's all just making up the story or making up the event.
No.
But
it's
making up
it's
the
not like that. You're just looking at what was prophecy like. We know for a fact that okay, go all the way back to the sage class in Israel in the Old Testament. They pretty much modeled their entire thing in the court, plus spilling over to the family after the Egyptian tradition of wisdom. You see the prophetic traditions in the schools and the guilds that came up throughout Jerusalem and some of the outskirts of the kingdom, following those sorts of similar traditions of so when Amos says I'm not a prophet or a son of a prophet, what he's not saying is that he's not prophesying. What he is saying is I am not a professional trained part of a guild that they used to have. Like Isaiah belonged to a guild. Sure, yeah. They had these kinds. Yeah, they had these kinds of things back then. You only get little flickers of that in the Old Testament, but in other literature you see, and they do kind of the ancient world. It's not to say that everything about them is identical, but it's also the differences are very important, and probably more important than the similarities. But you can't just look at the similarities and say, yeah, but this is different because it's Christian.
But the question
that's
well, why not?
Huh?
Why not?
Because they're using the same verbiage to describe. I mean, all we have is text, right? We don't have we don't have a DeLorean. So when you look at why are they talking as if the same thing is happening in the same, using the same language and the same words as this?
Okay, but because you have to.
But then we're supposed to just say it's different because this is in the Bible.
But you have to describe it somehow. And all you have is the words you have. So, like a pagan temple might look like a ziggurat and there's nothing inside of it. But then at the top, there's an altar that you put literal food on for this god to come and eat this or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so that's a temple. We know what temples are like. That's a temple. Okay, well, if we didn't have a description of the temple in Jerusalem, and we just heard there's a temple there, you might say, well, we know what temples were like in the ancient world. It's like a ziggurat, and then on top there was a little altar, and so that's what the Jews had. Well, hold on a second. The temple for the Jews was completely different than that. Yeah. And it was about inner and outer gates, and you got an inner court, and you got these things in there that symbolic things.
But they had to have some things in common.
Well, they did have some
water sources that go parallel to the edges and other things.
Well, yeah, there were similarities.
Gates facing east.
But that's what I'm saying. Like the best. Like how am I going to describe if I'm looking at Solomon's temple? It's a temple. It's like a temple. It's a temple. It is a temple. Yeah. He calls it a temple. But if I said, let's look at other pagan temples and be like, that's what the Jews had, I can't. It's more different than it's the same in that regard.
But we also have like pictographs of what this stuff looked like as well. So I mean, we can remodel the differences of what a ziggurat looks like versus what Herod's temple looked like for what.
But you just get temple.
So, yeah, I know, but I'm just saying. What did they mean? Well, you look at you see the same kind of spillover going back to 1 Corinthians, right? Some people think, well, Paul's talking about hair, and when the woman's head cover, he's talking about hair all the way through. Nonsense, rubbish. He uses hair as an analogy for the headgear, but it's not even just a mere pull something over your head or wear a scarf like the modern day movement wants to do. I mean, if you look at the archaeological evidence, why I like Ben Witherspoon's commentaries, he actually gives you pictures of first century Corinth stuff. I mean, he's literally talking about elaborate headgear, and he's like. Men don't need to wear that, even though men priests in pagan temples did. But also women wore that kind of, had a head covering. And he's like, the women, you still need to do that. And you just look at all that, okay, this is weird. You look at Asclepius and what's going on with all these body parts and what was their pagan. Yeah, there's differences, but there's also similarities. And so you gotta take all, that's why I'm not, I guess because I've read so much of this that I'm not scared that if somebody's out there doing weird altered states of consciousness and all this stuff, it would freak me out.
Yeah, but I'm not scared of it. Yeah. I'm saying, okay, like the temple thing just came to me by the Holy Spirit, I hope. And I gave that.
Or you want to stick it to your co-host.
That was an excellent example, I think. And so all I'm saying, and I'm going to leave it out. I'll leave it alone after this. and then you can say whatever you want, and that'll be the end. Okay, we'll let the audience decide. But with glossolalia, for example, we're trying to figure out what this is, and we're saying, okay, we got to go to the context, and we know what the context in the ancient world was. It was like this, and it was like that. It was like this and like that.
Well, Jerusalem really was multilingual.
Okay.
I mean, we haven't. You've been there. You've seen the ancient inscriptions in 3 or 4 languages.
I'm saying
all over Jerusalem.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about like what it was actually like to experience that. Like, are we talking about tongues or are we talking about tongues? You know, kind of thing.
Well, and I'm saying glossa literally means.
Yes, I know
tongue.
it means tongues, but that's a euphemism for languages.
Well, it also means tongue. It wasn't languages of fire sitting on them.
No,
right?
it was tongues of fire.
Right, and there.
That's not what we're arguing about.
Where's Nick Quint when you need him? Because I'm trying to think of what the other word for like language. Because it's a word for language, but it's escaping me right now.
The point is, I understand that we still even talk that way today.
Yeah,
like about tongues. What I'm saying is,
they're loving this. They're loving
I hope they are.
This is why you're patrons. You get the good stuff.
But we're going to cut a little piece out of this and stick it out there and be like, look what you guys missed.
Yeah.
But the tongues, to figure out what this was like in the Jewish context.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you cannot merely go to what the pagans and other people, the false religions were doing, because that's basically like saying, here's what demons did, so whatever God did is like that. And I don't know that that's a fair way to do it.
I don't know that that's a fair way to just.
Well, it was the most inhospitable way, I'll admit.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, but I mean, we see this is. You really need to sit into my primary source studies course.
Oh, brother. Oh, my gosh.
Because it really...
No, I think you need me to sit in because you read what all these people say. No, and occasionally you need someone to come through and...
No.
That is ridiculous. Need to sit through it
because it never fails that I have 1 or 2 students in every class that it makes them so nervous.
This doesn't make me nervous.
Well, yeah, but
I'd like to have...
I'm not saying you need to go learn from me.
I'd like to have an ecstatic experience.
You need to sit in my class and watch this happen to those people.
You know, people on the streets of Evansville are paying good money to have an ecstatic experience.
Yeah. You know? No, but I mean, it never fails in 1 or 2 of my classes. I'm not saying you're freaking out. Even I think somewhere in the back of your Baptist mind, there is a little bit of apprehension towards...
No, because you should know...
The commonality.
You should know that because of my appreciation for certain charismatics...
Yeah.
I would very much like for...
The weirder the better?
Yeah, well, experiential stuff. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
It's the reason I like going to a good concert experience. I like being in the moment and having an experience. And I'm a real touchy-feely guy that way. And so I would love for the charismatic understanding of tongues, as it is most generally held, to be true, because like they tell us all the time, don't you want as much of God as you can possibly have? Right. And I'm sitting here going, yes, I just don't think.
But anyway, back to what I was saying about it never fails when somebody sees that the Sumerian kings list, for example, they live, this was after the flood and they're still living tens of thousands of years, not just hundreds, tens of thousands. And then you talk about the flood, and then you talk about the Gilgamesh flood, and you talk about some of the other flood stories, and it never fails that somebody you've got to talk up, and you got to say because at this level they've already heard the whole idea that other flood stories confirm the Bible, not the other way around. They've already heard that, but when they get more of this, it freaks them out with the flood, with the long ages. With all these...
What he's talking about is there are these kings lists that have, like where people, like the Bible has people living hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah. And so there are actually other, extant literature gives us like other examples of thousands of years. And we know in those cases it was done, like it's explained that it was done to show honor or there's some theological significance behind it or whatever. And so... Dr. Pritchett is one that either is open to or actually believes, I don't know which.
What?
That's what's going on there.
Oh yeah, ascribing honor to them.
Yeah. Here's another great example of where we disagree. This is the disagree show. I'm not scared of that because I like.
But you think they really live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Right. Yeah.
So does John Walton.
Well, it's like
John Walton says there's no reason to not.
Yeah, because I'm like we said about.
And he knows about the Sumerian.
Like we said about the serpent speaking. Like I don't have a problem with seemingly incredible stuff. Yeah. I mean, if you believe in
except if they're just static utterances and altered states.
No, I actually believe that could be real. I just don't see that is the best explanation. That's all that's going on there. But with the Sumerian kings lists and stuff, what I'm saying is, what's the difference? And the difference, again, is there a similarity? Yes.
Well, it's really long. That's the only similarity there is.
Okay, but there's a difference.
Yeah, and as I teach my class in this, though, the differences are more important than the similarities.
Here's the difference that I think is important enough, is that they trail off in Genesis. Mm-hmm. Like, you can see it within the scope of one chapter, and I'm trying to remember which chapter, but it actually has them trailing off as it gets closer into, say, Abraham's story or something. Yeah. And you can see it going down, and then it'll jump back up. So it's not a clean break like someone's manufacturing this.
Right.
It slopes down and jumps up and jumps and then goes back down. Yeah. And then you get the story of Abraham. I think that's where it is, but I could be wrong. It's in my Genesis study. Yeah. But to me, that makes more sense of, and the fact that they're not extremely exaggerated like the King's lists.
Yeah.
To me, makes more sense that, yes, it is kind of like that.
Yeah.
But isn't that maybe like our God, to actually know that and be like, I'm going to stick it to these guys. I'm going to actually do it, but in a realistic way.
No, I mentioned that as a possibility. That's one of the things that I mentioned in my class. You don't ever watch my class. I watch his lectures. He doesn't watch my lectures. Yeah,
we don't watch my lectures.
Yeah, I do too.
You do not.
It's called quality control. and that's one of the possibilities I give in my class. I'm still not convinced of it.
So there you go, 2 arguments in one day. But this episode is a great example of what I think my principle. I wrote it in a blog article a long time ago, that you need both sides of this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not put me as the guy that doesn't care about scholarship. That's not me. Okay.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
No, we're not saying it can't be a guy who's read 31 books and it's only July.
Right. But the thing about it is, you need both sides of this. You need, as a scholar, or as a scholar pastor, or whatever, or as an interested layperson, you need the scholarly side of it to increase your understanding of what may be going on. But then you also need this principle, and people get irritated about this, and some people aren't good at this, frankly.
Yeah.
They do this wrong. But you need to be able to come up with an understanding of what you think is going on, and then push yourself back from the desk and look at it and say, okay, but being realistic, is that really what's going on?
Yeah, but here's the problem with that sometimes, where you don't have it can go wrong. Somebody's going to push back and say, now, I wrote a 200 pages on Romans 9:19 through 24 in the potter and the clay. Someone can say, Braxton, push yourself away from the table. You're a clay pot, and all that means is God is going to turn you into a vessel of mercy if he wants to, and you can take another. I mean, this is clearly deterministic fatalism. God picked you to be a vessel of mercy. He picked someone else to be a vessel. It has nothing to do with you.
And my response is going to be, Paul is quoting something?
Yeah, no.
Let's go back and look at Paul's quoting.
I know, but
also, that is nowhere else.
But I know, but that's the danger of just the principle. Push yourself back with the table and look.
Well, you got to have both.
You look at your English Bible.
You got to have both. You have scholarship and common sense.
Right. Is what I'm saying is, don't go so far you think you're doing common sense, you become a Calvinist, because.
Well, sure, and you have too much common sense. When all you're doing is common sense, you come up with something that sounds good for a sermon but isn't correct.
Yeah.
And if you come up with only scholarship, you get these people that we occasionally get at Trinity trying to get dissertations through, who think they found something that nobody ever found in Scripture before, that is this, is that, and this thing over here is a woman's toe, and this toe is a lion's tongue, and all these things.
Right.
And then by the time you get done, you never did the push yourself back and think about it, did you?
Yeah. Nothing I've said is new, though.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're inventing stuff.
I'm not into. I like Thomas Oden's thing where he said he wanted it on his tombstone. I don't know if they did it when he passed or not. He said, I want it said that I made no new contribution to theology.
Except that he was the first to try to do that. All right. Well, this has been, I think, a little fun episode. I was worried about it at first.
We got to give the tour, too.
But we'll do that. We'll do that. But this has been a great episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. And stay tuned right now.
The debate review was just an excuse to get debate on their minds so that you and I could argue, though.
Well, I didn't know that, but apparently that's what happened.
Well, yeah, because you wanted to argue with me instead of just saying, you're right, Dr. Pritchett, about everything.